In the wake of London and Manchester, politicians around the world are trying to convince the public that the free flow of information on the internet is a terror threat. In reality, independent online media are exposing the real terrorists, the politicians and their deep state handlers who are funding, arming, aiding, and enabling false flag terror. This is the GRTV Backgrounder on globalresearch.ca. Within hours of the bombing at Manchester Arena last month, police had identified the lone wolf suicide bomber they alleged was behind the attack. Mere hours after that, the independent online media had compiled a list of the many questions and problems with the official narrative of the event. That it was American intelligence, not British intel, who had allegedly identified Salman Abedi as the attacker. That the alleged bomber's father had co-founded the Libyan Islamic Fighting Group that worked with MI6 on a failed plot to assassinate Gaddafi in the 1990s and fought alongside NATO in his eventual ouster in 2011. And that Abedi's ties to ISIS were allegedly confirmed to the New York Times by two anonymous deep state sources. Within hours of the London attack last week, it was widely reported in the mainstream media as an ISIS-connected event. It was left to the independent media to report that the alleged ISIS connection to the plot was discovered by suspected Israeli operative Rita Katz of the long-discredited Site Intelligence Group, and that it is in fact the UK, the US, and their allies that have been instrumental in funding, arming, and training ISIS in the first place. When CNN tried to pass off a demonstration in London as a spontaneous event that their cameras happened upon, it was a citizen journalist who captured the behind-the-scenes footage, showing that the protest was a carefully stage-managed event, including the reporter and crew telling people where and how to line up for maximum effect. When NBC tweeted Megyn Kelly's recent interview with Russian President Vladimir Putin under the headline, "Putin does not deny having compromising information on President Trump," it was online backlash that prompted them to issue a correction, admitting that Putin not only dismissed the idea, but called it nonsense. Time and again, the flowering of citizen journalism and online independent media has thwarted the establishment media in their attempts to convey a narrative favorable to the deep state. So it is no surprise, then, that in the wake of the latest false flag terror incidents in the UK, that British Prime Minister Theresa May has identified the free and open intranet as the greatest facilitator of terrorism.
Second, we cannot allow this ideology the safe space it needs to breed. Yet that is precisely what the internet and the big companies that provide internet-based services provide. We need to work with allied democratic governments to reach international agreements that regulate cyberspace to prevent the spread of extremist and terrorism planning. And we need to do everything we can at home to reduce the risks of extremism online.
The UK government has already implemented some of the most draconian restrictions on internet usage of any country in the Western world, including the Investigatory Powers Act, which requires internet service providers to store all internet users' data for at least 12 months in case the government wants to access it, and the Snoopers Charter, which grants government agencies and intelligence services the authority to hack into individuals' computer systems and the ability to collect masses of data on people's internet browsing history, regardless of whether they are even suspected of a crime. Now, the government is looking to prevent any form of encryption and enforce government-mandated backdoors into any form of online security. What is especially chilling about this is not merely that such a system is fundamentally unworkable, nor that network-level blocking has repeatedly been ruled illegal, nor that such legislation would decimate Britain's software industry. The truly chilling part is that the government is now openly advocating for the creation of a controlled, surveilled, restricted internet where all content is accessible only by permission of the government. The threat of this type of Orwellian control over information is evident for those, like Professor Michelle Chossudovsky of globalresearch.ca, who recognize that the ability to counteract the establishment propaganda narrative is the only thing that will effectively undermine the ongoing and ever-escalating wars of aggression that are justified on the backs of these false flag terror events.
The legitimacy of these, of this military and economic agenda ultimately relies on propaganda. Without propaganda, they have no leg to stand on. without the war on terrorism, which is a legend, it's a legend because the terrorists are a creation of US intelligence. Without the war on terrorism, there is no legitimacy for bombing Syria and Iraq. Okay, we have to go after the bad guys, the bad dudes, ISIS, and so on. In fact, everybody knows that Al-Qaeda and ISIS, people who have studied it, know that those entities are supported covertly by the United States and its allies, financed, and so on and so forth, by Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and so on. But that does not necessarily trickle down to the broader public. And then some people say, well, the broader public is ignorant. The broader public is not ignorant. It's the media and the system which instills that ignorance. It's an engineered process of manipulation of public opinion. There are two things that we need to implement, and urgently. One is to inform the public, the broader public. But two, to question the legitimacy of this criminal undertaking. Okay? It's a collusive attempt to commit crimes against humanity on a mass scale.
Of course, the crackdown on the online independent media and citizen journalism is not limited to the UK. Governments around the world are enacting laws and empowering their own intelligence services to surveil and control their own populations, curtailing the ability of independent media to counter the mainstream propaganda.
Just this past weekend, it was revealed that in 2008, Australia's surveillance agency shared information about the country's citizens with its most trusted intelligence partners. Perhaps the most concerning part of this recently leaked Snowden document was the discussion between these allies over whether or not to share the medical, legal, and religious information of Australian citizens.
Breaking news overnight about just how much of our personal lives the government has been secretly surveilling. The Washington Post reporting a second massive intelligence operation, this one tapping into data of leading internet companies.
Prime Minister Recep Tayyip Erdogan said these recordings were fabricated, and he blames Twitter for damaging his reputation ahead of local elections.
And to take up where the president left off, digitization is, in a way, a disruptive force, a disruptive technological force that brings about deep-seated change, transformation of society. And it took a while until societies learned how to find the right kind of policies to contain this and to manage and steer this. And I think we live in a period of profound transformation.
In one of the clearest and most disturbing signs that independent media is firmly in the crosshairs of the global elite, the war on information was one of the topics on the official agenda for this year's highly secretive Bilderberg conference. This year's meeting of the Bilderberg Group brought together not only the usual gaggle of royalty, high-powered government officials, banking heads, and captains of industry from Europe and North America, but also a larger-than-average contingent of media executives and establishment-friendly journalists, including not only Bilderberg stalwarts like the editors of The Economist and Bloomberg LP, but Italian journalist Lily Gruber, Norwegian journalist Kjetil Alstadheim, and American journalist Amy Walter, as well as the editors of the London Evening Standard, Italy's La Stampa, and other mainstream publications. Ominously, joining this group behind closed doors were regular Bilderberg attendees Peter Thiel and Alex Karp of Palantir Technologies. Palantir is a shadowy data analytics firm founded in 2004 with the help of seed funding from InQtel, the venture capital arm of the CIA. Although the exact details of Palantir's relationship with the American intelligence services and their counterparts in the so-called Five Eyes countries of Australia, Canada, New Zealand, and the UK are not known, recently released documents have confirmed that the company's relationship with the UK's NSA equivalent, GCHQ, dates back to at least 2008, when they impressed intelligence officials with a demonstration of how their software could be used to track, trace, analyze, and de-anonymize internet traffic and online data on a mass scale. We now know that Palantir is a key part of the NSA's X-Keyscore program, which collects all manner of online data, not only emails, chats, and web browsing traffic, but also pictures, documents, voice calls, webcam photos, web searches, advertising analytics traffic, social media traffic, botnet traffic, logged keystrokes, computer network exploitation targeting, intercepted username and password pairs, file uploads to online services, Skype sessions, and more. Palantir helps intelligence agents map, trace, search, and organize this data in ways that make it impossible for people to pass information online without the government knowing about it. At Bilderberg, co-founders of Palantir were discussing the war on information behind closed doors with people like Sharon White, the chief executive of Ofcom, the communications regulator for the UK, and several of the reporters and editors who are charged with disseminating government-approved propaganda in the mainstream press. The implications of this are stunning, and they go far beyond a simple issue of public-private collusion around press censorship. At stake is not just the ability of the deep state to set the narrative of these terror events uncorrected by independent online reporters, but to define the very meaning of terrorism itself. If it turns out, as it did in the case of the Manchester bombing, and the London attack, and the Westminster attack, and the Paris airport attack, and the Berlin Christmas attack, and literally dozens of other terrorist incidents, that the alleged attackers were all known wolves who had been identified by and often in contact with intelligence services before their alleged involvement in these plots, an independent online media might connect these dots to find a common underlying pattern. Namely, that these events are being aided by, or at least passively allowed by these intelligence services, the same ones that have been caught time and time again, encouraging, funding, and even concocting terror plots in order to bust them just in time. However, if the deep state is in control of the apparatus for disseminating information online and censoring independent reporting, they can craft a very different story, one in which an overworked and underfunded intelligence system is straining under the burden of responding to all of these incidents, and only budget increases and even greater surveillance of the public can possibly reduce the threat from terror. If terrorist incidents are always tied back to shadowy groups linked to Al-Qaeda or ISIS, an online independent media might connect those dots to show how Al-Qaeda and ISIS were literally created, fostered, funded, trained, and equipped by the UK government, the US government, and their allies across the world as a tool in their quest of dominance of the Middle East and control of their domestic population. But such a story can only be told on a free and open internet, where independent voices continue to reach the masses and inform them of the truth about these terror groups. The truth, of course, is that the terrorists are the ones that are in charge of these organs of political, military, and financial power. The ones who are constantly terrorizing the public with these false flag events, and telling them that only greater governmental surveillance and censorship can protect them. To stop these terrorists is the prime political imperative of our time, and it can only happen through an independent media that is willing and able to counteract the official propaganda of events like the London attack and the Manchester bombing.
When the lie becomes the truth, and critical analysis is suppressed, differences of opinion are suppressed, when facts are suppressed, then we are in an inquisitorial environment. It's not simply a police state. It's an environment where people don't think. They don't have an inner consciousness. And it is reminiscent of the witch hunts of the Spanish and French Inquisition, but it's much more sophisticated, because it tells us anything that comes from high authority and which is then picked up by the New York Times and the Washington Post is the indelible truth. It goes into the news chains, and every single local station will replicate it. And if anybody says, no, this doesn't sound right, they will automatically be put on a blacklist as a conspiracy theorist, a bit like the witches of the Middle Age in Spain.
Now available from globalresearch.ca. The threat of nuclear war. The destabilization of foreign countries. The movement to resist this worldwide aggression. These are the topics addressed in The Globalization of War, America's Long War Against Humanity, the new book by award-winning author Professor Michel Chossudovsky.
America's hegemonic project in the post-9/11 era is the globalization of war, whereby the US NATO military machine, coupled with covert intelligence operations, economic sanctions, and the thrust of regime change, is deployed in all major regions of the world. The threat of preemptive nuclear war is also used to blackmail countries into submission. This long war against humanity is carried out at the height of the most serious economic crisis in modern history. It is intimately related to a process of financial restructuring, which has resulted in the collapse of national economies and the impoverishment of large sectors of the world population. The ultimate objective is world conquest under the cloak of human rights and Western democracy.
Buy your copy today and discover what is being hailed as a must-read and diplomatic dynamite. Available now at globalresearch.ca or wherever fine books are sold.